Thank you very much, Paul. As you know, we have canvassed questions from across the industry, and you very kindly agreed to engage and answer as many of those questions as time will permit. So between Matt and I, we've attempted to group those questions into fairly broad topics. The first of which is the EU and the EFSA approach. So if I could ask you the first question, and these are questions which range from very small businesses to global companies. The first question is that the UK FSA must have known that the EU Commission's position on the legal status of derivatives of cannabis resin has not yet been established. Why then has the UK and the FSA been urging businesses to submit novel food applications via the EU system?
We haven't formally heard from the Commission that they are actually rejecting any applications, and the legal route at the moment during the transition period is that any application for a novel food still has to go via the EC for the validation approach. So we have to still say that any application for CBD still has to go via the EC. That will change at the end of the year, and then we can formally take on the actual applications and the application process.
So just following up on that briefly, Paul, have you seen any sort of distinction between what we would term as the isolates of the synthetics and some of the more broad spectrum products? Is there any advice that you could give to anybody with regard to that, or is your position make the application and make it a comprehensive application?
Well, each application will be done on its own merits, and the applicant has to actually submit it based on their product. So whatever the product requirements are, because the applicant is the best placed person to actually know the risks, what's actually required to be shown to demonstrate safety for that product. So we can help. We can point towards guidance. There's clear guidance on how applications should be made, but it's not for us to dictate what each applicant should do. They should look at actually what their product is, what they're trying to actually get authorized, and apply suitably.
Okay, thank you.
The next question says submitted by the same person who submitted that former question, and the next question is this: will the UK FSA automatically inherit all pending and/or validated novel food applications on the 31st of December of this year, with risk assessments status to date?
Well, we inherit the catalogue because they've already been decided, the novel food applications on those. So if it's authorised and actually on the catalogue, then we inherit those. Any that get authorised, this is across the board for novel foods. Any novel food that gets authorised before the end of December, we will respect that authorisation, and it becomes straight into EU law. For where they were in transition, that will only part way through the actual process, we're going to collectively look at regulated products and assess how much of the process we take in. We're going to have a process that mirrors that, mirrors the European system, and guidance will be issued on the suitability of whether what we take into consideration, depending how far through the process is. But that's actually not been issued yet.
To be safe, would it be the best advice to somebody who has submitted to the EU to submit to yourselves directly come the 1st of January?
Yeah, we will actually require applications to come to us after the end of this year. What I'm saying is that if it's, say, for instance, it's got through the validation process, that will have a particular status in the European side. If it's got through the European risk assessment process, then it's obviously got a slightly different status. We'll assess what that actually means in terms of how it affects the input into our actual the assessment that we do, the application process. But we will have to they will have to submit to the UK after the 1st of January to continue that application.
Okay, I think you've probably answered the next question, which was, will the UK further adopt a system of union list of authorised novel foods? So I'd just tag on the end of that. Then will that be reciprocated? Is the intention to still align so that we will have the list of authorised foods, and the UK will accept rulings from the Commission or through
Well,
the FSA?
so anything that's actually been authorised before the end of the year, we will take in. That becomes the same status in the UK. Going forward, we will have a process in place for all regulated products, just not necessarily novel foods, and for the novel foods ones, when they become authorised, that will be on our website. There'll be a process for showing what products are actually authorised, what the conditions are, etc. So it'll be like a mirror to the union list. We will still have the union list, but it'll be like frozen as of 31st of January, 31st of December for us. But then we will have a system to actually show an equivalent going forward.
Right. Thank you.
Next point, Paul, you touched upon it in your earlier address. But the question is whether the halt from EFSA is going to delay the application validation process for the UK. If EFSA have stopped the validation phase of the applications process, we need an extension to the March 2021 date. And this, no doubt, relates to the information that we broke last week, that DG Sante have indicated that they will not be advancing any CBD applications from naturally derived cannabinoids through to the risk assessment phase.
Well, just to clarify, there it's actually not EFSA that holds it; it's obviously the Commission, because the Commission does the validation, and we haven't formally heard there's any halting of it. Our view is that regardless of what the Commission do in terms of their timelines, it doesn't actually affect ours, because like I said, there's a legal requirement at the moment to actually go via the EC for applications, but we've got that informal process where we will feed back in preparation for starting our timeline for applications in January, and there's nothing that actually alters it for the Commission on our side, so we don't see the need to actually to alter the deadline, and whether or not the Commission have got a view on the narcotic side is not an issue, because it's a national delegated responsibility, and it's with the Home Office, and they do not concur. So nothing that we are aware of will actually alter the timeline for the application process for our side.
Okay. The United Nations vote, we've got two questions, which we had a number of questions, and we tried to sort of compress those into two. So the first one for you, Paul, would be, how could the proposed United Nations vote on the rescheduling of hemp extracts, it says here, cannabis extracts, affect CBD and novel foods in relation to your position as the Food Standards Agency?
Yeah, like I said, the Home Office is the lead on the actual the UN Convention, because it's the lead on narcotics. They are not of the opinion that CBD is a narcotic. The Home Office, that is. Our view is that if a product is not a narcotic, and obviously that will be on a case-per-case basis, because we're talking about the CBD product. So if a CBD product is not regarded as a narcotic, and similarly, if it's not regarded as a medicine, then it's a food. So it's still subject to the novel foods regulations as a food. So what the convention deals with is it's a separate issue. If it comes up that it is a narcotic, then it cannot be a food, so it wouldn't be regulated. But the Home Office view is that CBD is not a narcotic. So we are progressing on the assumption that a CBD product that is not a narcotic will be a food.
Okay. Am I able to read into that then that a CBD product that contains controlled cannabinoids could fall into that area, and then but that's the responsibility of the applicant, and the Home Office would deal with that advice, Paul, or is that something someone could seek advice from your department for?
Well, we wouldn't regard it as a food unless not a narcotic. So, we can't regulate on something that whether it's a narcotic or not. That is a Home Office policy. It's a police enforcement issue if it's a narcotic. So, we just come from the point where if the Home Office are not regarding something as a narcotic, the police are not enforcing it as a narcotic, then the assumption is it's a food, and we will proceed accordingly.
Okay, thank you for your honesty.
In relation to that, THC is a narcotic. Have you been given any advice from the Home Office as to what level of THC in a CBD product would be tolerated and no action taken against any manufacturer because of the presence of that level of THC?
Well, I mean, the Home Office has got guidance on what constitutes, a narcotic around the THC area. So, we take their steer on that one. We can only go with what their interpretation and views on it are.
Thank you, Paul. There's a linked question in relation to the United Nations vote and the convention. And it's, do you think there's a chance to get novel food applications for CBD products approved before the December Commission on Narcotics and Drugs vote on the World Health Organization cannabis recommendations, particularly the CBD recommendation? And this relates to the reconsideration of some of the terms of the 1961 single convention that has been due for discussion and voting at the UN on 2 occasions thus far, and has been delayed at this stage until December of this year.
Yeah, I mean, assuming it is December of this year, then obviously that's still within the transition period, and therefore, the UK is not in a position to actually make any judgments on novel food status. That still sits with the European Commission. So it would the only decision that could be made was one that's progressing through the EC system at the moment, and I don't think there's any that is sufficiently progressed enough to actually be likely to be making a decision. Obviously, we're no longer a member of the working groups because we're no longer a member of the EU. So we're getting those decisions secondhand, not from the actual committees like we used to. But our understanding is that it's unlikely that there's any applications that are likely to be approved before that period. Obviously, after the end of the transition period, it's a different matter. That's because then that's a UK application process. But in terms of the question, no, I don't think it's likely.
Again, a topic that you touched upon in your address, and we've termed it existing products and products new to market. The question's a lengthy one, and we will publish all the questions so people can follow them in due course. But the question is this. CBD products have been sold in contravention of UK law since January 2019. Company 1 brought a CBD product to the market on the 31st of March 2019, knowing that every product that it sold within the UK was sold unlawfully. Company 2 intended to bring a product to market in early 2019, but following the classification of CBD as a novel food, decided not to do so, not wanting to act unlawfully. Following the FSA's announcement on the 13th of February 2020, companies 1 and 2 each undertake the necessary scientific work to make novel food applications for their respective products. Both companies submit their completed dossiers for novel food authorization to the UK FSA on the 1st of January 2021. Having submitted its dossier, Company 2 brings its product to the UK market. On the 1st of March 2021, the 2 companies each have their novel food authorization applications validated by the UK FSA. Thus, as at the 31st of March 2021, the 2 companies each have products which meet the same regulatory requirements with the same standard of regulatory data supplied to and validated by the regulator. The SFA says that Company 1 will be able to remain lawfully on the market, but Company 2 would be unlawful and must not sell its products until final authorization is granted. Company 1 only achieved this market advantage by acting unlawfully in the first place through its unlawful conduct between March 2019 and February 2020. This approach would appear to be in breach of natural justice and contradictory to the observations in the quote, "The judge over your shoulder, a guide to good decision making," close quote, published by the government legal department. What legal authority does the UK FSA assert that it has the autonomy to treat two otherwise indistinguishable companies and their products in this manner?
Okay, there's quite a lot of content there, so I'll take it in bits. Firstly, should obviously point out that Company 2 should not bring any new product onto the market until its authorization has been completed. That's correct. If they did, neither would technically be lawful, because obviously they should have a prior authorization, like I said. Company 2 is acting in compliance with the law if it keeps the product off the market, because that's basically what the novel foods process is. It's no different than any other product that a company wishes to bring onto the market as a novel food. I don't know. Say somebody discovered a new chemical in a daisy, for instance, and they wanted to bring that on the market because it has similar potential for a CBD, in terms of what it offers the consumer. They would have to go through all the steps of actually gathering all the data for the application. They'd have to raise the money to actually do the research and in advance, and then the time taken to actually get the application through authorization. So that's no different than Company 2. So it's not that they are being disadvantaged. Company 2 is actually doing the correct manner. I suppose the way that we would look at it is every other novel food product that's ever gone onto the market has had to do the other process. So it's not that they've been disadvantaged over the two companies. I would say that the Company 1 has taken what is an illegal step to gain undue advantage compared to every other product that goes on the market. Now, so we couldn't allow a new product on the market because that would be going against the spirit of the novel foods regulations. New CBD products going forward would just have to meet the principles of what should have happened in the first place with the CBD industry, which was no food, no products on the market before authorization. Because I mean, a lot of companies have gone out there and actually made a lot of money from these products in advance. That hasn't happened with the rest of the novel food industry, because they've had to actually raise the money, put all the effort in before selling the products. So we don't see it as giving unfair advantage. We think it's a different thing.
Well, in that regard, Paul, it is giving an unfair advantage to Company 1, is it not? Because in fact, your decision is that they, despite having broken the law for that entire period, are being permitted to continue to benefit from that unlawful conduct. And yet there is not any distinction between those two companies in terms of the risk to the public as of the date that both of their applications are validated. So it's not the issue to compare Company 2 with other manufacturers of other products that are not to do with CBD that have approached the novel foods regulations in perhaps how they were designed, but it's comparing somebody who is in the direct market, and your decision is effectively allowing the company that chose to break the law for that entire period to benefit from that conduct, and penalising a company that behaved appropriately and who has a product which is no more, which has received the same regulatory approval through validation, and therefore the same exposure to risk or non-risk as the product of Company 1. Your decision penalises the company who acted properly and benefits, therefore, the company who was unlawful thus far.
we had a decision to make on in terms of how we brought the industry into compliance. Various choices. It was well within our actual rights to actually remove every product from the market.
Mhm.
We decided not to do that. We wanted to respond in a proportionate manner. So we have allowed products to continue to be sold, in order to try and move the whole industry into compliance during a period. So local authorities could have enforced at any stage. We said that hold off on that. We formulated the plan. So those products that were already in the market, we treated as a lump and say, right, in theory, they should have come off the market because they weren't authorized. That's what happens with every other novel food. With the voluntary withdrawal, or we tell them to take it off if it accidentally goes on the market because they're not aware of the process. There's been a few cases of that we've dealt with. Obviously, a much more complex industry in terms of its size, in terms of the public's uptake of CBD products. So that lump was held as it is. We couldn't then say, actually, you can bring on any product you want, doesn't matter, while authorization is going on, because we wanted to bring industry into compliance. It would be a nonsense for us then not to actually say, well, compliance actually means that you don't put a product on the market, any new products on the market, without having gone through the actual application process. So keep them as they are. You can continue to sell because it's a complex market and you can carry on, but from now on, it has to be in compliance with what the legislation requires, which is no product on the market until prior authorization. So that was the choice. We decided not to take every product off the market, and that was the delineation that going forward, it'll be treated in the correct procedures following the novel foods regulations.
But isn't the answer to allow any product which receives a validated application, or any product whose application, or the application for which is validated by the end of March, to be sold thereafter?
No, because the validation process does not prove it's a safe product. The authorization process is there to assess the safety of the product and the requirements that it is safe for the consumer. The Food Standards Agency's main priority is protection of consumers from safety of food. So it would be nonsense for us to say, okay, you've got a good application. It's looking at the contents of the application to say, okay, it contains it looks like it contains enough information to progress on with the risk assessment, etc. It's not doing the risk assessment. The risk assessment is what's required to actually assess the safety. So the spirit and the requirements of the legislation are that it's a step, the validated process, because there's no point in asking our risk assessors to look at a product that's, look at an application that's inadequate. So it's prepared to go into the process. It doesn't mean it's authorized. It doesn't mean it's safe for consumers to take forward. So the validation is a step, but it's not an answer.
Okay, so the company that broke the law for the longest receives a state-sponsored exemption to continue breaking the law.
Well, like I said, we had the option of actually removing all products from the market. We chose not to do that. We responded in a proportionate manner, and that was the way we elected to do it, thinking it was best because of the best balance overall of safety and bringing the industry into compliance.
Can I come in there then, Paul? Because I think, and of course you'll have seen as well, we've seen a number of very big new launches recently into the UK market. So are trading standards, or the Home Office, or yourselves, is there an interim policy to enforce that aspect of novel foods, or are we going to be waiting until April to see enforcement? And I suppose this strays into the questions we have later. I'm just wondering whether that's something that's going to happen soon, because across all of the requirement for enforcement, we understand that it's a matter of resources, and COVID hasn't helped that at all. but we are seeing people who are being non-compliant in a whole host of methods and reasons with regard to their product.
Well, I mean, we were clear with the announcement, no new products on the market. So that's nothing that's already on the market. So if there's cases where new products are being introduced in the market, then local authorities have got the powers to enforce and remove that. We've been clear on that one. There's no new products on the market without prior authorization. So if it's new to the market after the actual announcement, which is when we specified the date for that one back in February, then local authorities have got the powers to deal with that.
Okay, thank you. So I think you probably answered the next question. I'm going to read it out for the benefit of those that submitted it, but I think you might have a little bit to add. So for new businesses that are preparing to enter the UK market prior to March 2021, what requirements should product owners consider to ensure that they're not only approved before the closure date, but also are prepared for the ongoing regulatory process to ensure that they can remain operating within the UK market?
Well, I think the key thing is the interpretation of the word approved. Obviously, if it's a new businesses entering the market, that's a new product, and as I just said, there's no new product should be coming onto the market. It's going to be impossible, frankly, to actually get an approved product from scratch, within before the deadline. So I assume that should mean validated. If it's validated, then like I said before, if it's a new product, there's no actual deadline for new products, because they can be introduced into the system as and when. Prior authorization should be given before it actually goes onto the market, so it shouldn't actually be going onto the market, but the actual deadline doesn't apply.
Great, thank you. I think a lot of this is there is a lack of understanding in elements of the industry as to how long the process takes. So yeah, I appreciate clarifying that. So the next section is quality control and industry regulation. So Matt, I think you've got the next.
Yeah. Question is, how do we stop outlandish claims regarding the benefits of CBD?
Well, claims obviously are outside our remit. If it's a medicinal claim, that would be MHRA. If it's around well-being, etc., it's DHSC. We don't regulate what claims are put on things. We only regulate the novel foods aspects and the wider food aspects. So if there are claims being made and there's evidence of it, then they would be the bodies to approach in order to actually to deal with that.
The next question, I think, could be interpreted two ways, which is, how does the industry stamp out products that are not what they say they are? And I'm interpreting that as, is there a mechanism by which people who are seeking to establish best practice, to become compliant, to follow your guidance, that they see alongside people who are just have a disregard for the whole host of regulation? What can those people do?
Well, I mean, food has to be what it says it is. So, like as I said before, labelling has to be correct. There's a whole range of other food laws that you have to actually comply. That's not specific to CBD. That's just a general requirement for food law. So it's no different than any other food in that respect. In terms of the industry doing its own compliance, I mean, then we would obviously require the onus is on each company to actually ensure that their food is correctly labelled. It's actually safely dealt with, so it's good for the consumer. If it's up to the companies, if they see bad practice, how they get that message out against other companies. It's there are ways and means of actually informing people that there's bad practice going on, but the onus really should be on the individual companies to actually make sure that they are complying.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, Matt.
Go ahead.
I think we fall into two categories. That there is I think a very large element within the industry that are striving to do the best to provide a high quality product for the consumer. But as you alluded to earlier, there was this people term it as the green rush. There were people trying to make a quick and a fast buck, and that's damaging for the whole of the industry. And I think that engagement with those who are trying to do well, they're crying out to a certain extent to see more enforcement of those who are selling mislabeled products, inferior products, products that contain controlled cannabinoids.
We understand that, and that's why we have, we move towards getting industry for compliance with a deadline. Simple as that. I mean, the application process is there to show that products are safe, that the regulations are complied with, that the consumer is going to be protected if the product makes it onto market, and by that very nature, those that aren't will be cannot get through the process. Simple as that. And with it, that's why we've said that if a product isn't aligned with a validated application by the end of March, it's not on the market. That will help improve the quality of the market across the board.
Thank you.
How can the industry be regulated without the regulations being too onerous?
Well, just repeat what I said before, that CBD is a food. There is a range of food requirement laws that CBD extracts as a food are subject to. The novel foods regulations is one of them. That is a step to show that the food is safe. It's there to actually help the consumer understand that it's a safe product. Our feedback is that this is good for business. That the consumers and citizens actually understand that if food is properly regulated, then it's safe to eat. That gives them the encouragement to actually to eat those ones. So too onerous is a view, but the laws are there to actually help industry sell products to a wide range of consumers that understand that it is safe to buy them.
So another question that's come in has been, would a quality kite mark be of use?
Well, I mean, we always encourage things like, if the kite mark's around sort of analysis, or if it's around, quality production systems, and obviously, we encourage the use of those, and it's fundamental to the actual application process. There's clarity in how good the manufacturing process is, how good the production runs are, the sourcing materials, the whole range of things. So there's many things you could put under a kite mark. We don't necessarily mean that there has to be a standard that for different organisations. It's the principle of what's behind a kite mark. We would very much encourage, and as I say, it's a requirement to be reflected in the application process anyway, that quality measures are being adhered to.
I suppose market authorization at a successful novel food application is the kite mark in itself, isn't it? And that's a third party authorization rather than what we often see, which are these sort of self-certifications and people patting themselves on the back and saying how well they're doing things, whereas the future is for somebody else outside of the company to say, yes, you're doing it correctly.
Yeah, I mean, the novel foods process is a step into the wider food market, if you like, because then there are a host of mechanisms for showing quality of material and maintaining the quality of the production, etc. for foods once they're authorized as being safe to be in the bigger market.
How do we ensure the industry is seen as 100% ethical?
The Food Standards Agency's primary role is consumer safety. It's there to do the work for them, to actually make sure that any foods that are in the market are actually safe to eat. I mean, clearly, ethics are very important to a range of citizens on in buying potential and in their views on products, etc. But it wouldn't be regarded as a primary factor in safety, which is where we're coming from. So I don't think that will be one of our drivers for ensuring the industry is 100% ethical. I mean, the ethics is linked to quality, to to a whole range of other factors that will be part of the application process. So I'm not saying it's completely excluded from it. I'm just saying it wouldn't be the primary driver to making sure that products that get through the novel food process are safe.
Another question we have is there a code of conduct that participants are legally obliged to adhere to? And again, I think you've answered that for us, haven't you?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's just to repeat on what we said before, which is, we've taken on what was the previous application process. In terms of the conduct, it's demonstrating through the application process that the product is safe, and then if and when CBD products are authorised, the code of conducts are from the wider food law and the requirements for the food industry across hygiene principles and etc. The whole range of requirements that are just for any other food.
Another question: how do participants in the supply chain provide proof of provenance? And one assumes that this is referable to in the submission of their novel foods dossier, where it is a requirement to give information about the entire supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of the application process that they'll show that what systems are going to be in place to ensure that the quality of the material, the raw materials, the materials to be actually processed through. That'll be part of the assessment that'll be looked at. Does the applicant actually explain how they intend to ensure that the supply chain all the way through is actually is of good quality, is consistent, and how that'll be managed. So yeah.
And then the last one from the quality control is a question, which is how do suppliers currently conduct recalls?
Well, I mean, the FSA deals with a lot of food incidents. So if it's meaning recall as in that where something has gone wrong with the process and we've got a potential food safety incident, then that's exactly it. It's no different than any other part of the food industry in terms of how recalls are done. If there's an incident, if there's something is wrong with one of the products and there needs to be a recall on the final product, there are tried and tested methods where our incidents team coordinate with our policy teams and with the industry, with local authorities, and ensure that the product is can be removed as quickly as possible.
Yeah, the next group of questions we've put under the banner of general novel foods issues, and the first of which is this: can you confirm that because traditional olive oil infusion, that's immersion of industrial hemp into olive oil with no further manipulation, concentration, distillation, or isolation of any kind whatsoever, falls outside of novel food qualification and therefore does not require authorization? How does the FSA, can or will the FSA be providing a quote, not requiring authorization, close quote, certificate or statement of such traditional and totally natural infusions? So somebody there is manufacturing a product like this. How are they going to be able to deal with trade and standards to make them aware that they don't fall within the requirements of novel foods?
Well, as I mentioned in the presentation, we are aware that hemp oil by cold compression is therefore not being subject to any of the mentioned sort of processes there. That's not novel. That's known because it's got a history of consumption. So the same with olive oil. Nobody's ever going to say that's novel. So that's not an issue. That's fine. That's not. There's no issue in the novel foods requirements for that one. There isn't really a not requiring authorization certificate. I mean, I mentioned the Article 4 submissions from before. That was if there's any doubt, that can be done, and that'll be a ruling. There is also a traditional foods process, which is where something has been eaten outside the EU for a sustained period. There's an application for that, don't think that's what they're going to mean. They're meaning by their question here. So there's no register as such. It's just that hemp oil is known to be not novel. it's in the catalogue, I think, as that, that it's not a novel product. So it's already registered as that, and that will carry on. There's no difference in that one.
I think perhaps what they were maybe concerned about is that when enforcement action starts to begin next April, that their products may be swept up through a potential lack of knowledge on the part of trading standards. There being a hemp product, they're not being in possession of a validated application, and therefore one assumes the author is concerned that their products are inadvertently swept up in regulatory issues through potential lack of awareness or knowledge on behalf of individual trading standards officers or regions.
Okay, if there's that angle, like I said, we're going to be creating a mechanism for ensuring local authorities know which CBD products are linked to a validated process and those that, application, and those that aren't. We can certainly, we'll certainly make that clear in the guidance that we give them around that area to help local authorities in that distinction.
On that one, Paul, I encounter almost on a daily basis confusion with people as regards to this definition of hemp. So in my mind, we're talking about hemp seed oil, and you have to distinguish between UK hemp, where you can't utilise the flowers, the leaves and the buds. It's just the stalk, whereas in other European states, you're able to cold press from the whole of the plant. So are you making a distinction? So are you able to say this part of the plant is fine? So, kernel free, hemp seed, cold press, stalk, yes, that's traditional. But as soon as you start to incorporate other elements of the plant, so the flowering buds, for example, then that would not be a traditional or non-novel.
Yeah, I think we said that in the past. We're clear on what the distinction has been, and we haven't changed our position on that.
Okay, thank you. Right, so we have, please describe the most likely path, including a general timeline of how a novel food application that is submitted to the EU Commission will be processed post-Brexit. So I imagine this is something that we've touched on, which is about the crossover, so when your portal becomes open.
Exactly that. It's legally at the moment, applications have to go to the EC, the European Commission, and for validation. After post Brexit, technically we are, because obviously we're outside the EU now. If that means after the transition period, which is different, then as from the 1st of January, we can formally take on the start of the application process and take it all the way through. We can't do it at the moment, so that will be the only difference post transition period. Post Brexit, we're in the transition period, and we're still subject to the laws and requirements of under the Commission's rules.
To answer, although some of it may be beyond the FSA's direct remit, but we'll get you to answer it anyway. Is this: what jurisdiction does an approved novel application give the license holder, and what cost would be expected to receive a license? If I have a ready-to-go product complying with legislation, including lawyer fees and registration fees, what timetable could a client expect?
Okay, I'm interpreting jurisdiction as mean what can actually be done with the product at the end of that. Now, that will depend on what's actually submitted in the application, because in the application you have to put what the use of the end product is, and that might be a range of, for CBD ones, it might be a range of concentrations that the product is going to contain, what vehicle it's going to be in, whether it's a oil-based or water-based or such like. It'll give a defined set of criteria for how they see that. So that's how I'm interpreting the jurisdiction part, that if it's approved application, in other words, it's authorized, then that the constraints on what's been requested and has been agreed that is safe will be reflected in the authorization. So that's first part. Actual costs of a license, there is none. There's no cost for an application. There's no cost for a license. And in fact, there isn't a license per se. It's, you know, there's an authorization that's reflected in the fact that that product, you know, that application has been approved under the system. Where there are costs is gathering the information, the time, the resource, etc., to make the application, putting it together. Actually, you know, obviously the construction thereof, but also the data that's required within it. And you'll see online various estimates. I mean, that's, you know, we're aware of what the estimates are that people regard the costs of those are. But they do vary. But we haven't got any specified costs that we have to actually, you know, require from the applicant.
If one were to interpret the jurisdiction in this regard, the author may be wondering that they submit an application to the UK FSA next year in January.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Let's say in due course, we don't need to say when it is, but in due course, it receives a full authorization from the UK. Will that automatically be adopted by the European Union?
Oh, no, that'll be a UK specific one.
But are there any plans between the UK and the Union to have passporting provisions that if one jurisdiction grants approval and authorization, that will passport into the other one?
I'm not aware of any plans at the moment. I mean, that's obviously outside our remit in terms of, you know, negotiations, in terms of how future trade agreements are going to be, you know, are adhered to. You know, we can only comment on what's there at the moment. And the moment is there's no reciprocal arrangements because, you know, the UK has its own separate system. We're not going to reflect the EU system as it stands. That would, I think, would require change of legislation, and I'm not aware of any plans for that. In terms of the last part of the question, the timetable for, you know, what a client could expect. Well, the actual timings for an application are set out in the actual legislation anyway. The validation process is up to about a month for one aspect of it. So that's you know, actually to reply to say whether the application is valid of the right sort and content. The duration for the risk assessment element is up to 9 months of working time. Now that's a start-stop one. So if there's information found to be missing during, you know, going through the risk assessment, you can stop the clock, request the information from the applicant. When that's received, restart the clock. So it might not be, it's not necessarily 9 months start to finish. It's actually 9 months of work. And then the final stage, the risk management aspect, is up to 7 months. So in theory, you know, there's a target of around about 17 months. It might be quicker, but it start to finish, it could be longer due to the start-stop process. Okay.
So another industry question. In your view, Paul, should the CBD industry be spending more time learning from other food ingredients that have obtained novel food approval rather than reinventing the wheel? After all, the novel food framework has existed for many years, and there should be plenty of other ingredients that we could draw experiences from.
I mean, the novel food process is a set process. It's you know, it's set out with this guidance. We're pretty much mirroring what EC and FSA used to do anyway. So the guidance is there to actually, you know, what the steps are, what's required, etc. So that can be fine. And there's no reason why you can't learn from others in terms of, you know, tips, etc., on how to actually go through the process. But each application is actually taken separately. It's dealt with on a case per case basis, and they are all based around the product. So, you know, I suppose there's principles that can be built on. Not really reinventing the wheel, because each application is unique to that product.
So, come the 1st of January, will the FSA be releasing an identical guidance document as which exists at the moment from the Commission for the process?
Well, I mean, what we said so far is, you know, is the same for because we're receiving, applications on an informal process, is, use the EFSA guidance, because there's no plans to change it. So it's the same steps. It fits within the wider regulated products process, and that's set out on our website. The steps that will be taken and where we fit in. But in terms of the actual, the application, then that's required, then that follows the guidance. The difference is the steps, the UK steps. So the fact that we do the risk assessment, the fact that we've got UK committees that we're looking at it independently, that it goes through. If it makes it through to the end, it's a minister that decides whether it gets authorised or not. So it sets out where the differences are, but where there's commonality, there's no reason to change it.
Okay, thank you.
Now, the author of the next question has clearly picked up on the phrase, quote, selective CBD extract, close quote. And what they ask is this: can you define what a selective CBD extract is, as this phrase has been used in regards to novel food applications?
Yeah, I'll go back to what I said before in terms of, hemp oil that's been, cold compression is not novel. Where there's a different process, so an extraction process, whether it's CO2 or whatever, you're having a different composition from just effectively squeezing it. Okay, if you're actively removing something, if you're concentrating it because it's a different way of extracting it, that's a different composition. So it's a selective CBD extract because it's designed to get much CBD out as possible. So it's a phrase that's used to define that process sort of generically, where we know it's not a hemp oil cold compression one. So that is what is defined as it's a new process. It's a novel process because it hasn't got the history of consumption.
Okay. So the last one in this section is the likelihood of a novel foods application being accepted affected by the number of end products that are being applied for? For example, a CBD isolate that is intended only for use in, let's say, an MCT oil, is that more likely to be approved than the same isolate which has 4 or 5 end uses? So, for example, tincture, capsules, an oil, and maybe another foodstuff.
I mean, when the novel food process was devised, it was designed, primarily for a singular product. It is actually a singular applicant, I should say, for a new product. So there's no distinction where you got multiple products. Each one is treated on its own merits, is on its own case. They're completely independent. It'll go through the same process regardless whether it's designed for 1 end product or 5 end products. The magnitude of the likely sales, the magnitude of the number of products that are produced, it's got no bearing on it. Every case is independent and treated the same.
Okay, so just to tag on to that one then, Paul. So if we have somebody who has a wide range of products from a single active ingredient, is there going to be any restriction or limit on the number of end uses that could be within a single application?
Right. Well, like I said, the usage has to be specified, and that might be things like ranges. It might be what it's going to end up in. So it could say confectionery. It could say oils or whatever. There's no limit. But what I would say is that where you're putting in a wider range of concentrations, a much bigger range of products, etc., the whole application has to be geared to show that what the risks are within that bubble, within that range of possible end products. It's got to reflect it, and it's got to the risk assessors have got to be able to see that every scenario fits within what the risk assessment is, so that there will clearly be more evidence required to prove where that any risks are mitigated or understood and dealt with. So it's that could be that's more the limiting one, is making sure that the application reflects the range of usages.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we've heard from clients and from industry participants that they'd heard mostly from the commission that there would be a limit on the number of products, if you like, that could be included in a single application. So that's not the case.
I'm not aware of that. No.
Okay, thank you. So Paul, yeah, your announcement on the 13th of February this year requires market participants to achieve a validated application by the 31st of March next year. This obviously requires you to receive the application in sufficient time for you to validate it by that date. In order for a market participant to know by what date they need to submit their dossier in order to achieve the backstop deadline, they need to know how long it will take you to validate an application. How long will it take you? And what happens on the 31st of March to applications which have been submitted but which you have not validated? And finally, would this publication of a submitted by date be more helpful to market participants as opposed to a validated by date?
Okay, well, the actual validation process is roughly a month, or up to a month. There's two steps to the validation. One is, but the primary one, the legislation sets out that it's up to a month to actually reply within. Obviously, that's the requirement to actually for our part of the application to look at it to validate it. Hence why we've encouraging early informal submissions, so we can help out with with pointers in terms of what you want to do with the quality. It's worth remembering that that's not all that's required to get to that point. The substantial part of it will be actually, like I said, the data gathering, the information process, writing the application, etc. There's no preset time for that, because that's down to the the individual applicant to put together, because they're obviously they're the ones that are applying and best placed to know what to write with it. There's potential tox studies, all that sort of thing. So they had to be factored into the submission time. All I can really say is that the offer's there to look at them informally before the end of the year, and then as from 1st of January, it's a formal process. So the quicker you get in, the better, because obviously if there's things that are not right with the application, the earlier you get in, it gives a better chance to actually sort of suggest what's needed in order to maximise the chance that you're going to get something that's validated before the deadline.
So, if I interpret that correctly, then, if you have a substantial application which contains sufficient information for it to be validated, that would have to be with you by the end of February.
Yeah. But, I mean, ideally, as soon as possible. But in terms of, we are permitted a month under legislation to actually, get those turned around. So yeah. So I mean, in that respect, there is a cut-off at the end of February to do so. But we would encourage people to get them in as soon as they can.
Actually, yeah.
Kind of interesting. So people are aware that you have a month. If they submit by the end of February, and because of the deadline, there is a clamour for submissions at that date on the 27th of February. What happens if you haven't been able to validate them all by a month later?
Well, we do best endeavours to do so. That's our requirements. I wouldn't want to speculate on what would happen. Other than that, let's just encourage people to reduce the risk themselves of getting by putting it in earlier, because obviously if they submit at the end of February and they've got 1 month to turn it around, that gives them no time to make any corrections if the actual application is found not to be validated. So that the earlier they can get them in, the better.
So then, will you give people an indication this side of Christmas, then, if they're submitting an application to you and sharing it with you, you'll be able to give people an indication that this will be validated in 2021?
Well, we certainly start the validation process in 2000. We don't know how many we're going to be getting. I mean, we know how many we've got so far that have put in on the informal process. If there's going to be we're working with industry to get a much better idea of how many applications we're talking about. So people have got an application that's due. Let us know, so we've got a much better way of actually knowing how many we're facing, and we can then and timescales will be great. With that'll help us planning our resource a lot better to actually to deal with it. But yeah, I mean, the time windows are clear, and to try and reduce the risk for everybody. That's why we're encouraging people to get applications in on the informal process before the end of the year.
Okay. Can I ask roughly how many that you've had informally to date, Paul?
I think it's less than 10 so far, but I mean they're progressing.
And are any of those in a condition that you would say, if that was on your desk in February of next year, you would validate that?
I mean, they're variable. I mean, we're feeding back on them. There's always room for improvement.
Okay.
There's a range of quality ones. I don't think there's any that are there yet, because obviously we'd need to. There's still things that they could need to consider and say that's why we're feeding back. But that's the value of doing the informal process. That this is being dealt with early, and it gives the applicant a much better chance of actually, having a comprehensive application that will get through. Okay.
And have you had any from North America?
I'm aware of the numbers. I'm not sure about the sourcing of them. And obviously there's commercial issues anyway. But I actually don't know where the sourcing of them. I just know what the applications are rather than sort of the company names, etc. Trying to keep away from that.
Okay, thank you. I only ask because I know, again, another issue is that the way that Health Canada and the way that the generally regarded as safe operation takes place between Canada and North America, often we find it a challenge to educate people as to the non-transferability or the transferability of work that's been done. So I just wondered whether that was something that you were encountering.
And we would treat each case as a case rather than looking at not looking really at the company. It's what's the actual quality of the application? Does it fit with the criteria? That's obviously what we're focusing on.
Yeah, Paul. This is a question which has arisen, and its prominence has become more relevant recently because we've seen on social media advice being given to people how to sort of avoid the novel foods issue. I think that's the best way of describing it, the fairest, by telling them to relabel their product and giving them what's best described as an idiot's guide to how to deal with the regulator or the or enforcement when they come to your premises. So I think I'd like to give you the opportunity to answer this question, and I know you've touched on it before. So the question is, the FSA say it's up to the company to determine whether the products are novel, whilst saying in the same breath that they will start enforcing next year. If an enforcement officer challenges my opinion that my products are not novel, what would be the process from there?
Okay, so it's correct. The onus is on the company to actually know their product, whether it's novel or not. The novel foods regulations are there to offer a route. The Article 4 submissions that I mentioned before is one method, and that allows an applicant to test whether there's a history of consumption, whether it is novel. Where an enforcement officer is involved, if they have the rights to actually to consider a product, they can enforce as required. If they challenge it, then the onus being on the company. The company just has to prove that it is not novel, and that is, like I've said before, is proof of a history of consumption of that particular product. If they're unable to do that, then the route would be through an Article 4 submission. We can't take those at the moment to be still be through Europe. Going forward, it'll be different, but it's on the company to prove that it is not novel. Otherwise, the enforcement officer is within their rights to proceed with enforcement. They could do now on CBD, like I said before. We've suggested not for the reasons I've given, but it's no different than any other novel food process.
So I'm assuming you're considering the fact that sort of an emerging grey market post April next year, where people relabel as not for consumption, this is a massage oil, and start putting hemp oil on the bottles. That's a concern for those investing huge amounts of money in compliance, that there's going to be an emergent and continuing market of unauthorized products.
Did you say massage oil?
Yeah,
So you're meaning they would relabel it as something that is not a food? Is
yes.
that your implication? Well, I mean, that's, you know, the local authorities deal with a range of issues like that already, not just for CBD. So you know, they're aware of processes to actually deal with incorrect labeling, with inappropriate, you know, products. You know, they've got the authority and they've got the experience to manage that. It won't be anything new for them. It'll just be an addition that it's a CBD related issue compared to other you know, products that they've had to deal with before. The same principles.
Okay, thank you. So
the next section that we've given a title to is who needs to make an application and the transfer between cannabinoid ingredient suppliers. And the first question looks like, given its wording, is from a trade association, because it says this: most of our members buy extracts or finished products and are not involved in the extraction or manufacture of raw materials. Is it enough for these businesses to use a supplier that has a validated novel food application, or do they need to be named and have their product data, that stability formulation matrix, on the supplier's novel food dossier?
Well, the application, I mean, if this case, if we're talking about the supplier, you know, the main supplier, then if that application includes sufficient usage, then that will be within the categories, you know, available, and then that defines it. As long as there's a linkage between the two. So, you know, if for instance it was the main supplier had actually said that the usage is within a vegetable oil with extract up to say 5%. As long as that's what's fitting within the other one, and there's a linkage, and you can get access to into all the information. There's actually they can be linked. There's no specific requirement to be named as the final product company, but clearly, obviously, it would help people if they could see that the linkage was there. That, you know,
how direct does that linkage have to be? Because you could have a generic description which could cover 10, 20, 30 different retail, the different manufacturers of end product by a generic description. How close does a nexus have to be between the description in the application and the product that's for sale? Because, for example, you could have, take it as simply as possible, CBD in an MCT oil.
yeah.
But that would cover 50 completely different products, because the 50 different products have different flavors, different extra ingredients added in.
That would have to be, I mean, that'd be the linkage in terms of a complete understanding of the manufacturing process, to show that any changes, you know, for the final product don't affect the risk assessment in any way. So it wouldn't be sufficient for the, how would I describe it? So that, you know, the business, you know, the members' business, just to say, well, we get this product from the manufacturer, and then we add in this, yeah, as an application, they would need to be able to show, as part of the assessment, what the manufacturing process is, all the conditions, the supply chains, whether, you know, heat treated, you know, the whole range of factors, to show that it doesn't affect the final product. And that's what I'm saying. There's that envelope of conditions, and the risk assessment has to match that. So the business would have to be very tightly connected with the manufacturer, the supplier, to be able to demonstrate fully the range of requirements for the risk assessment process.
Perhaps let's look at it from a slightly different angle, or through a different prism. Let's say that the applicant is the manufacturer of a CBD isolate. Mm-hmm. And that applicant is currently saying to clients to whom it sells and supplies that CBD isolate, don't worry, I've made an application, your product, your end product will be covered because I've stated CBD in an MCT oil. And that manufacturer of the isolate is saying that to 100 clients. What type of nexus does there have to be in that isolate manufacturer's application to each of those, in this example, 100 people who buy it and include it in an MCT oil, along with other ingredients such as terpenes or flavors?
I mean, each case is taken on its own one, so it's very difficult to give a generic answer, because you'd have to the onus is on the applicant to show that the safety case and etc. So it would depend how much access they got to the information, how they're able to demonstrate it. I mean, in theory, yeah, I suppose it could end up with 100 ones, but you'd have to be ensured that there's nothing that doesn't there has to be full disclosure of the information required to be able to assess that each of those end products was safe as part of the application process. Otherwise, they'd have to be treated as separate applications.
So in that example, it would seem inevitable then that the isolate manufacturer's application would need to include things like, and I know Francis may talk about it in due course, but things like ADME data and stability data in respect of the end product that hopes to be covered within the application.
Yeah, I think Francis is a better place to answer the details of the application process.
Okay, well, I think it naturally comes into the next question without getting too technical, which is a scenario. So I'm a manufacturer of end products. If we proceed on the basis that one, the supplier of my CBD isolate has submitted their application for authorization on their CBD isolate and it has been validated by the UK FSA, and two, I have submitted my application for authorization of my end product utilizing their data for the underlying ingredient. If I want to switch to another supplier of CBD isolate who also has a validated application for the same, and the chemical composition of whose CBD isolate is the same as my current supplier, will I be required to submit a new application for my own products despite my recipe and production being consistent? So this question is about the handcuff situation, if you like, whereby a manufacturer who is working with end product manufacturer who's working with an ingredient supplier, are they trapped under that supply chain forevermore, or can they port their manufacturing and align it under an existing application, if that makes sense, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, there's no really generic answer, because we'd need each case to be taken on its own merits, and it would actually need to be seen that it is indeed exactly the same spec. There's exactly the same end use, the same risks. Nothing has changed at all during the manufacturing process, because it's easy to say it's the same chemical composition, but it would need the absolute detail to be able to prove that it is an exact match. So it's very difficult to actually sort of say yes or no, without actually getting into the actual the application itself, to have absolute assurance that there's no difference.
We're going down the route of the sort of the collegiate application, where if we have 5 or 6 isolate manufacturers, and they all claim that they have a high purity. So let's say they're all 95, 96, 97% pure CBD, and then the remaining botanical fingerprint is made up of a mixture of some cannabinoids and other residual items, which are consistent over batches, but that those residual compounds are different for each one of those isolates. Will they each have to have their own toxicological data and their own submission, or can they be? I guess what I'm asking is, how dissimilar can they be to be within the same bubble or envelope, or do they have to be identical?
Well, I mean, are you talking about where there's a main applicant and that the others want to be included? Go back to what I said before, which is about the usage conditions. if you've got the same basic manufacturing, the same manufacturing process, and you've got the different uses, and you're able to show the full range of risks for that envelope of products, then it can go all into one application. Or do you mean retrofitting them, to another application? I'm just trying to get the distinction.
Yeah,
Retrofitting.
yeah, retrofitting. So transferable data, if you like, across a number of applications.
Well, as an example, so Company 1 has a novel food authorization for its isolate. Company 2 has its own novel food authorization for its end product, utilizing Company 1's isolate.
Yeah.
If Company 2 wants to change the supplier of its isolate, how close to each other do the isolates have to be for you to consider that there's no differentiation in risk profile of the end product?
Well, I say each one will be treated on a case-by-case basis. There's no generic answer to say how close. Apart from you just have to show that the manufacturing processes are identical. It's not just the end product. In that respect, it's what actually happens start to finish with the product. You'd have to be able to demonstrate. So you'd have to have full access to the initial manufacturing process to be able to demonstrate that they are absolutely identical. There's no other new steps. There's no differences in how things are done to show that they are the same.
And would you, taking that example then, does the source of the biomass, so that which is going in the processing pot, is that integral, or could you have, if you're having a purification process for an isolate or a distillate, and two suppliers have different sources of biomass, but their manufacturing process is mirrored in that they're able to remove impurities and end up with a consistent product. Would those two be viewed as having the same authorization?
Potentially not. We'd have to look at the detail of what actually, what the pots you're talking about, how they proceeded. I don't think it's not a straightforward yes or no answer.
Okay.
Well, an awful lot of information there to take from Paul's, both his presentation and then the questions and answers. And Steve and I will perhaps now just run through a few of the topics that were discussed between ourselves and Paul, and that seem to be the most standout moments that market participants will need to be aware of and focus on. And perhaps one of the first things to appreciate is the honesty that came that because we've left the EU, the UK FSA no longer has a seat at the table in terms of the discussions that are taking place between member states and their food regulatory agencies, and therefore is learning matters secondhand. Perhaps one thing that is relevant to is the information that we broke a couple of weeks ago now that indicated that the EFSA, DG Sante and the Commission appear to have taken a decision that they were not to proceed with the validation of CBD novel food applications derived from naturally derived cannabis until there's been a decision at the UN in relation to the Single Convention on Narcotics. Now, Steve, it's important that we see there from what Paul told us and told everybody that whatever happens in the EU, the Home Office has taken the view in the UK that CBD is not to be classed as a narcotic. How do you feel about that in respect of the implications for the UK CBD industry, leaving aside Europe, but UK alone can only be a positive?
Yeah, I think it can only be a positive. I think the main point that came out of that was that it's a delegated issue, and that regardless of the outcome of the UN vote, the Home Office takes the lead. And from Paul's perspective, they've already made a decision. So if CBD is not a narcotic, then it can be a food, and they are firmly of the opinion that it is a novel food. So whilst that's not the answer that some in the industry who are wanting to avoid the novel food issue altogether would have wanted, I think for those participants who are serious about making applications, it's very heartening. So yeah, I took that. I thought he was very candid and honest, and I think the fact that perhaps there is information which is coming out of the Commission and coming out of the European Food Standards Agency, which they are potentially hearing secondhand. Yeah, all in all, I thought that was very positive.
Yeah, far better to be dealing with issues such as contaminant levels of THC and other cannabinoids than dealing with CB itself as a narcotic and therefore prohibited unless medicinal and under prescription. So where there's been some concern within the industry that the industry may be cut off at the knees, certainly as the UK is concerned, it seems that that is not to be an issue and that matters can proceed irrespective of the UN vote, positive, negative, or whether it's adjourned again.
Yeah, I mean, as he said, if the Home Office aren't treating it as a narcotic, and if the police aren't enforcing it as a narcotic, then they will treat it as a food, and they are treating it as a novel food.
We also raised with him in relation to some information that we see being put into the market presently, that those who have a Home Office exempt products license are exempt from novel foods. Again, what he told us about that was that there is no such thing as a selective CBD extract exempted from novel foods because of the Home Office license. Again, potentially misleading information being placed into the market by certain elements, and clarification important so that people aren't misled. Yeah,
and I think misled is the key here. It's whether it's wishful thinking or aspiration on behalf of some, I don't know. I can't imagine it is because of the level of knowledge there, but it's a wonderful sales pitch, isn't it? That all our products will be fully compliant. But what we know is the fact that the Home Office determines that something is approved on the basis that there is an absence of contaminants or an absence of controlled cannabinoids, then that pushes it, in Paul's word, even more towards the novel food category. So Home Office stamp of approval that you are not carrying controlled cannabinoids allows the Food Standards Agency to treat it as a food, as a novel food, and it will require market authorization.
Yeah, selective CBD extracts are novel food, and simply because somebody has a Home Office license in respect of it does not exempt it for that purpose alone.
Yeah, active pharmaceutical ingredient is no exemption from novel food.
Perhaps another issue in relation to who you submit to and when. Clearly, Paul indicated that if you make a submission to EFSA currently and it is validated, then come the 1st of January, that validation will be passported over to the UK's new system because it was applicable at the point when the UK was bound by the EFSA system. But what we hear from Paul is that if an application is made to EFSA currently and has not been validated by the 1st of January, then there will be no transmission across to the UK. EFSA will not make the UK aware of applications that are in the pipeline but unvalidated, and the applicant will have to submit again directly to the UK FSA so that it is officially recognised and registered. So no assistance from EFSA towards the UK FSA and no assistance there towards the market participant. They will have to make a resubmission or a first submission to the UK rather than assuming that it would be handed over by EFSA if it hadn't been validated at that point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the important message was, don't wait until the 1st of January. Engage and begin engaging with the Food Standards Agency in parallel with any submission to EFSA.
Well, I think when we come on, perhaps in a few minutes, to talk about the validation process and the quality of applications, and that will become even more clear. But perhaps at this point in time, let's just touch upon, again, other market information that we hear being put out there to market participants. That don't worry, I'm a isolate or I'm a cannabinoid ingredient manufacturer. Your product will automatically be covered simply because I am making an application. And what we heard from Paul is that that's not the case. There will have to be a linkage to the complete manufacturing process for the end product. so that they can, the FSA can understand the manufacturing process for the end product and ensure that it is covered by the CBD ingredient manufacturer's application. Because without that information, it will be impossible for them to tell or ascertain whether the manufacturing process for the end product has affected the safety of the cannabinoid ingredient. A significant factor that market participants who currently have some contract manufacturing services provided to them are going to need to take heed of.
Absolutely. I think it suits certain market participants to peddle that myth, and they continue to do so, despite knowing full well that that's not the case. And I think when people move from here and hopefully view the Q&A with Frances and her presentation, that will become far more clear.
Yeah, I think for everybody, the hard part is that the FSA are unable to state in advance how much nexus there must be between the ingredient manufacturer's application and the end product. Paul certainly tells us that, and Francis does as well in due course, that they are going to have the ADME and stability data for the end product included in an application somewhere, whether that be by the application being made by the cannabinoid ingredient supplier or by the end product manufacturer. But if it is only the former, then the idea that they will just identify the product is misleading. The cannabinoid ingredient manufacturer within their application is going to have to include at least a minimum of information about the manufacturing process, the ADME and the stability data. And that's going to have to come from the end product manufacturer, and therefore there's going to need to be close relationship and working relationship between the two companies in order that the application that they don't control, i.e. the application that isn't controlled by the end product manufacturer, has all the necessary data in that to mean that they will be covered in due course.
Yeah, and I think importantly there, I mean, we'll come on to discuss later the time to do your science, but irrespective of that, manufacturers need to have an open and honest dialogue with ingredient suppliers at the moment. Otherwise, they run the risk of being hostages to fortune. We could quite easily see a situation where a failure to engage at this stage now, if not before now, will mean that they are devoid of any form of choice and can only manufacture to an ingredient supplier's white label specifications.
Well, which brings us on to the topic of switching between cannabinoid ingredient suppliers, where we have a situation whereby an end product is covered by a novel food application. In this example, let's perhaps treat it as if they made their own application so that there's no contractual liability or lock-in. But a company makes its own application for its end product using data supplied by a specific ingredient manufacturer. What were your thoughts on the ability of that end product manufacturer to move then between different cannabinoid ingredient suppliers?
My thoughts are it's going to be very problematic. I mean, I made a note, and I think Paul's words were it would need to be established that it was exactly the same product, same manufacturing, same risk. It would have to be an exact match. They would need absolute assurance. I think, again, that means that manufacturers need to have this information. You could be entering into the handcuff situation, a long-term relationship, and it's very important that you decide at this stage who you wish that relationship to be with.
Well, and we'll see in due course when we come to consider Frances's question and answer, where we discuss with her the potential benefits and drawbacks of a consortium type application, because the exact match, as referred to by Paul, it's unclear at the minute until the FSA gets some assistance from their advisory committees as to how exact the definition of exact will actually have to be. and therefore perhaps anybody who has concerns in this regard should certainly watch the later question and answer and discussion that we have with Francis, because we try to get to the bottom there of how close or how proximate to each other two ingredients have to be for the FSA to treat them as substantially equivalent and treat them therefore for the purpose of regulatory approval as being the same.
I think the one thing I'd take from this is this is unfinished business. I think anybody who is attempting to fully complete a dossier at the moment, including all of the science required, is taking a punt. And people who go on, and I urge you to go on and watch the next two, will actually see that word used. I think it was a thoroughly worthwhile exercise. I think Paul was exceptionally helpful. There are many questions that are raised, but there were many questions that were answered. And I certainly think it was worth all of the work, and I certainly think it's worth the donation to the National Health. So please don't sit there with your cup of coffee watching this for an hour and then move on to the next one without going to our Just Giving page, please.
Another issue that we raised was about the idea of the validation date and responsibility and potentially liability if applications are submitted but not validated by that date. Now, obviously, Paul referred to the statutory criteria that the FSA would have up to a month to validate an application, and therefore, in essence, applying that time period, companies would need to have their dossiers submitted by the end of February. However, what we discovered was that thus far, there have been less than 10 informal applications notified to the FSA, and none of those 10 have sufficient quality or material within them for them to be validated.
Well, they're operating in the dark at the moment, Matt. I mean, they're operating in the dark at the moment. I mean, people are scrambling around trying to find answers, and I'm not sure that the answers exist yet. I think what's clear from today is that in September or October, we will hopefully have more advice and more guidance. But it draws into question that which is required to obtain validation, and hopefully we've sought more and achieved clarification on that with Francis.
Well, companies need to be careful, because if they think, for example, that they can simply submit by the end of February, they're taking a rather large risk that their dossier contains everything that the FSA will require. Because if it doesn't, and the FSA requires further or additional material to be supplied to them, once you run past the 31st of March date, then you would be beyond the validation date and you wouldn't have a validated application. And therefore, companies need to be careful that the clock simply doesn't run out. And we advise everybody to engage sooner rather than later, both with our advisors and with the FSA, to ensure that there's an ongoing dialogue, so that it appears that as and when the FSA establish their policies as we move forward, or receive the advice from their external advisory bodies and committees, that the market participants who are engaged with them can react upon that straight away. Ideally, we would know that information now, but it seems that the FSA don't even know that information at the present stage, and they're waiting for advice from organisations and bodies and committees that they can't control.
Yeah, and that just goes to show that anybody who's telling you at the moment that they have a guaranteed pathway to market authorisation is either capable of seeing into the future or is potentially overestimating their abilities. So I would say be very careful, engage with the FSA and your advisors at the earliest opportunity, seek further clarification and advice, and be in a position to commit to that advice when it's received.
Perhaps I think the final topic that we'll touch upon may be one of the most contentious, and that's in relation to how the FSA intend to treat products that are new to market. Paul indicated that they were well within their rights to remove all products from the market and prohibit any coming to market, but they wanted to act in a proportionate manner. In doing so, the FSA currently, as their policy stands, have established a system and a set of principles whereby those who have broken the law for the longest period are entitled to benefit from that conduct, whereas those who may have been responsible in advance and not wanted to break the law have now been penalised for the application of that responsibility. And we have a situation whereby two companies could be in exactly the same position at the end of March next year. They both have validated applications. Neither one presents any more risk to the public than the other, because the FSA are satisfied that they have established at least a valid application that deserves to be considered on a risk assessment basis. And yet, because one of them broke the law in advance, they get a commercial benefit and can continue to sell. Because the other one acted responsibly and didn't do so, they're penalised. And it strikes us that that is a matter which is highly likely to come for a legal challenge in order that all market participants can be treated in the same manner.
They may have started out proportionately, but this has led to a disproportionate result and an unreasonable result. And I can't see how, I think, as you said, that, you can have a state-sanctioned advantage provided to the most unlawful company. If we come from the position that the way to judge the industry now would be those who are seeking to comply and those who are seeking to submit a dossier, then I think all of those who have a valid dossier come the end of March next year will be able to remain on the market.
Well, that's what most people would think would be fair and proportionate. If the FSA take a different view, then it's probably going to be necessary for certain elements, certain market participants, to join together and take a judicial review action in the High Court in order to establish whether the FSA has the ability, or whether that policy of the FSA is lawful, or whether it does discriminate for a non-permitted reason.
I understand the reasons for doing it. They're very difficult decisions to be made. And having stepped away from the European position, which is you cannot have a product on the market until it's received authorization, the FSA are in new territory. But unfortunately, the law is the law, and you cannot discriminate on that basis. So I think we may see a loosening of that. I think the important thing here is that a company is providing a high quality product which is labelled correctly, which doesn't contain controlled cannabinoids, and which is seeking a market authorization under the novel food regime. And we may well see changes there. But you're quite right. We've seen some very large market entrants in the previous 4 months, and the commitment there financially would undoubtedly lead to a challenge were that to be enforced. But I think when you look at the whole picture, would resources be best directed at enforcing compliant, or companies seeking to be compliant, when you have companies that are riding roughshod over all of the issues? So high levels of contaminants, high levels of controlled contaminants, mislabeling, poor quality products, and health claims. So I imagine, I would hope, that enforcement begins, and that enforcement begins to remove all of those people who have no intention of becoming compliant, rather than targeting those unfairly or unjustly or disproportionately who have every intention of being so. Time will tell.
Absolutely. But the investment that's needed to be compliant is such that market participants should not be simply proceeding on the basis that they hope not to have enforcement of what may well be an unlawful policy. I mean, certainly on behalf of all our clients, we will be engaging with the FSA to see whether they will be willing to review that policy. And if not, then a challenge will have to be made to it, and a judge will have to decide whether it is proportionate and or lawful. But one way or another, it seems that the FSA will have to perhaps put their mind again to what was no doubt a policy that was well-intentioned, but maybe has had consequences beyond that which they considered at the time.
Absolutely. You would hope that they would be able to reassess